Welcome to the My Bard story.
And hello to you. Today, we're really diving deep into a passage that's just full of drama and, well, theological weight. Genesis chapter 19, verses 12 through 29.
That's right.
We've been looking through notes from, various scholars to really unpack this key moment. Lot's escape, basically, from Sodom as it's about to be destroyed.
It's a powerful one. And it brings up so many big questions, doesn't it? About, divine judgment and why people hesitate and just how amazing God's mercy really is.
Exactly.
So our goal here in this deep dive is to pull out the most important insights, maybe some surprising details from the notes, and really explore what this ancient story means for us, especially, for those of us in ministry today.
Right. We'll go through the verses, look at some interesting scholarly takes, and then talk about the takeaways for today's believers and leaders. Quite a story. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's turn to our study note. Starting with Genesis 19, verse 12, from the NIV. The two men said to Lot, "Do you have anyone else here, sons-in-law, sons or daughters, or anyone else in the city who belongs to you? Get them out of here."
What strikes me right away is that shift. 1 minute Lot's showing hospitality. The next, it's this urgent order.
Yeah.
And these visitors, who we now get, are divine messengers.
Angels, yeah.
Right. They're not just concerned about Lot himself. It's his whole network. That Hebrew phrase, milapu, who else do you have here? It really emphasizes his broad scope, anyone connected to him.
And it mentions sons-in-law specifically, the boin. And verse 14 clarifies they were pledged to marry his daughters, so betrothed.
Exactly. The note suggests betrothal, which means this chance to escape. It extended even to those who weren't maybe fully integrated into his immediate household yet. It's a really wide offer.
A wide net, definitely. And the command itself, get him out of here, home and home. It's so stark.
Absolutely imperative. No room for misunderstanding. The danger for this place, the city, is immediate and total.
Moving on to verse 13. Because we are going to destroy this place, the outcry to the Lord against its people is so great that he has sent us to destroy it.
Okay, so here's the why. No ambiguity. It's a divine mission. We are going to destroy this place. That Hebrew, mashenanu, and the word destroy, it's strong.
Yeah, the notes link it back to the flood narrative, right? Ruin, corruption, complete devastation.
Precisely. It's not just breaking things. It's an undoing. And the reason, the outcry, the aquiom against the people is so great, Gakala, before the Lord.
And scholars like Walton and others point out this outcry. It's probably not just about the sexual sin we saw earlier. It likely includes really severe social injustice, oppression. The whole society was corrupt.
Yes, that concept of the outcry, zaqueum or aqua, actually reaching Yahweh signifies the sin has hit a critical level. It demands divine attention, divine judgment. These messengers are just the agents executing it. God is responding.
Let's read verse 14. So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law who were pledged to marry his daughters. He said, "Hurry and get out of this place because the Lord is about to destroy the city." But his sons-in-law thought he was joking.
So Lot, to his credit, he does what he's told. He goes, he warns them, uses the same urgent language. Hurry, get out. Kumu menhomakum haza.
But their reaction, wow, they thought he was joking.
Yeah, and that verb, it's interesting. It can mean joking, sure, but remember Sarah laughing in disbelief. Or Ishmael mocking Isaac. It often has this edge of mockery or derision.
So it wasn't just, ha, Lot's funny. It was more like, you can't be serious. Disrespectful, almost.
That's how scholars like Spicer might frame it. They were just too embedded in Sodom's reality, maybe its sense of security or normalcy. They couldn't grasp the spiritual danger. And tragically, that disbelief seals their fate right there.
Verse 15, with the arrival of dawn, the angels urged Lot, saying, "Hurry, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or you will be swept away when the city is punished."
Dawn's breaking. The clock is ticking, seriously ticking now. The angels urge. Lot, again, way, means to press, to hasten. They're really pushing him.
And notice the wording, your 2 daughters who are here. Hanimash, the ones found. Does that imply others weren't there?
Well, Walton suggests it might mean exactly that. Maybe those sons-in-law, having dismissed him, weren't present, or perhaps other family members. It underscores this is the final call for whoever is actually with him right now.
And the warning is brutal, lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city, Pentisapea Bashner.
Swept away, total destruction. And it's tied to the city's win, its guilt, its iniquity. If you stay, you share its fate. Period.
Now, verse 16, this is such a telling moment about Lot. When he hesitated, the men grasped his hand in the hands of his wife and of his 2 daughters and led them safely out of the city, for the Lord was merciful to him.
He hesitated or lingered. Way mama. This one Hebrew word says so much.
Yeah, the commentaries, like Wenham, Kidner, they really focus on this. It shows he was still attached, doesn't it, to Sodom?
Absolutely. Whether it was his stuff, his status, maybe just paralyzing fear. We don't know for sure, but he's clearly not jumping to obey. He's delaying.
And because he delays, the angels have to physically grab him, grasped his hand, weyaziku, and basically drag him and his family out. Weyanyomu milanir.
It's incredible imagery. He's not saving himself. He's being rescued despite himself. It's a forceful act of grace overcoming his reluctance.
And the reason, the text spells it out. For the Lord was merciful to him. Bimlam YHWHLA.
That mercy, that imlam compassion, it's the key. Kidner and others stress this. It wasn't Lot's merit here, not his obedience. It was God's compassion. And as verse 29 confirms, it's likely linked to Abraham's earlier prayers. Salvation here is pure grace.
So they're outside the city. Verse 17, the instructions get even more specific. As soon as they had brought them out, one of them said, "Flee for your lives. Don't look back, and don't stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the mountains, or you will be swept away."
Okay, core command. Flee for your lives. Himmelo and Lakera. Escape for your life. Super urgent. And then 2 direct prohibitions. Crucial ones.
Don't look back, Altabio.
And don't stop anywhere in the plain. Al-Tabja Lakera. The plain is the danger zone. Stop there, you're done.
The only safe place offered is the mountains, Hara. And that, looking back, Brugman might say it signifies more than just turning your head right. It's about attachment to what's condemned.
Exactly. It's about a clean break.
Yeah.
Physically, spiritually. It's essential for survival.
But Lot, astonishingly, in verse 18, he argues, "But Lot said to them, 'No, my lords, please.'"
I mean, really. He's been physically pulled from a city about to be incinerated, and his first response to the escape plan is, "No, please, Alacha."
He calls them "my lords," Achana. So maybe he gets their authority now, as Hamilton suggests.
Seems like it. Yet he's still trying to negotiate the terms of his own rescue. That's very human, I suppose. Fearful.
He explains why in verse 19. "Your servant has found favor in your eyes, and you have shown great kindness to me in sparing my life. But I can't flee to the mountains. This disaster will overtake me, and I'll die."
He acknowledges the grace. He sees the favor, the great kindness. He's God's covenant loyalty, really. He knows they spared his life.
He gets that part.
He does. But then the fear kicks in hard about the specific instruction. I can't flee to the mountains. Luchul Haihimahara. He's convinced the disaster, hurrah, the calamity, will catch him, Teabakani, stick to him, and he'll die anyway.
Baldwin calls this weak faith, and you can see why. He's focusing entirely on the perceived difficulty of the journey.
Rather than trusting the power that literally just yanked him out of Sodom. His fear is bigger than his faith in that moment. It's a really challenging picture.
So, verse 20, he proposes his own plan B. "Look, here is a town near enough to run to, and it is small. Let me flee to it. It is very small, isn't it? Then my life will be spared."
He spots this little town nearby, and he emphasizes how insignificant it is. It is small, Mir. He even repeats it, pleads almost. It's very small, isn't it, Everest Miki?
Like he's trying to convince them it's no big deal to let him go there instead.
Exactly. It seems less daunting, closer, maybe safer in his mind. And his goal is clear. Then my life will be spared, Ilunapcha. He's negotiating out of fear, looking for a compromise.
And incredibly, verse 21, the angel agrees. He said to him, "Very well, I will grant this request too. I will not overthrow the town you speak of."
Very well, I will grant this request too. The Hebrew is literally, "Behold, I have lifted up your face in Anashdayan." It's an idiom for showing favor, granting a request. Matthews calls it divine condescension.
Wow, God is patient with his fear.
Amazingly patient. And notice the specific concession. I will not overthrow this town. He uses that same verb, kek, that describes Sodom's fate. This strongly implies this town was in the judgment zone, but is now spared specifically for Lot because of his plea.
Grace upon grace, even in his fear. Verse 22 then gives this unbelievable reason for the continued hurry, "But flee there quickly, because I cannot do anything until you reach it." That is why the town was called Zoe.
This line floors me every time. I cannot do anything until you reach it. Ke yul leshodai shama. The divine judgment, the overthrow of the entire plain, is literally put on hold.
It can't happen until Lot is safe in his chosen, albeit compromised, refuge.
Exactly. It shows the incredible value God places on the one he's saving. Lot's safety is the priority before the judgment falls, even a hesitant, fearful Lot.
And that little note about the name Zo, Ayer, meaning small, it links right back to Lot, calling it Miar, small.
Yeah, it's a permanent reminder etched on the map, isn't it? A reminder of Lot's fear, his negotiation, and God's surprising accommodation.
Verse 23 marks the moment the waiting is over. By the time Lot reached Zoar, the sun had risen over the land.
The timing is precise. The sun had risen, Hashemishiare, just as Lot came to Zoar, Lo Butchera. The window of grace, which started narrowing at dawn, 15, closes the very instant he reaches safety. Divine timing.
And then, verse 24, the judgment. Then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens.
The Lord rained down, WH, Himerer. God is the active agent. And what did he rain down? Burning sulfur and fire, Gapriborj. It sounds catastrophic, maybe volcanic, maybe meteoric. We don't know the exact mechanism.
But the text leaves no doubt about the source, does it?
None at all. From the Lord out of the heavens, may a YHWH min Hashemayim. Waltke points out this repetition, Yahweh acting from Yahweh in heaven, strongly emphasizes this is a direct divine act of judgment, not just a natural disaster.
Verse 25 describes the awful scope of it all. Thus he overthrew those cities and the entire plain, destroying all those living in the cities and also the vegetation in the land.
There's that verb again. He overthrew, weatu, turned upside down. Westerman says this becomes the defining word for Sodom's judgment.
And look how complete it was. Those cities, the entire plain, Kal Hakir, all those living there, even the vegetation, Wama.
Total annihilation.
Yeah.
Nothing spared in that designated zone. It underscores the severity, the finality of God's judgment on that place.
Verse 26, the tragic turn for Lot's wife. But Lot's wife looked back, and she became a pillar of salt.
A direct violation of verse 17. Don't look back. She looked back. Watawa yisho maru, from behind him. The verb nabat implies more than a glance, maybe a gaze.
And scholars like Von Rad or Baldwin see this as, well, as symbolic, right? Not just curiosity.
Exactly. It suggests her heart was still back there. A lingering attachment, a longing for the life, the place God had condemned. She couldn't fully break away.
So the pillar of salt, Nat Malat, becomes this stark, permanent warning.
A monument to the fatal consequences of divided loyalty, of being unwilling to let go of a world under judgment. No wonder Jesus said, remember Lot's wife. It's a serious warning.
Then the camera shifts, verse 57, back to Abraham. Early the next morning, Abraham got up and returned to the place where he had stood before the Lord.
Early the next morning, Wayashim Akaram Babuka. That phrase often signals diligence, purposefulness. He goes right back to that specific spot where he interceded in chapter 18.
He's waiting, watching. He wants to see the outcome of his prayer and God's decision.
He does. He's invested. He needs to know.
In verse 28, he sees it. He looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah, toward all the land of the plain, and he saw dense smoke rising from the land like smoke from a furnace.
He looked down, Yashab. It's an intense gaze, often implying observation from a height, maybe even judgment. And what he sees is devastation. Dense smoke rising. Kitch-hori.
Like smoke from a furnace, kitch-ha kitchen. Such a vivid, terrible image.
It confirms the totality, the fiery intensity of the judgment. It's a visual confirmation of God's action, and sadly, the answer to his prayer, not even 10 righteous were found.
Finally, verse 29 gives us the ultimate theological reason for Lot's survival, the big picture. So when God destroyed the cities of the plain, he remembered Abraham, and he brought Lot out of the catastrophe that overthrew the cities where Lot had lived.
This is absolutely key. God remembered Abraham, Aram, and as scholars like Sarna really emphasize this remembering Skowsker in a covenant context, it's not just like, oh yeah, Abraham.
It's far active than that.
Much more. It means God actively calls to mind his covenant, his promises to Abraham, his relationship with Abraham, and he acts based on that faithfulness.
Wow. So Lot's rescue is a direct result of God honoring his covenant with Abraham and Abraham's prayers.
Precisely. It elevates Abraham's role and his intercession significantly. Walke would strongly agree. Lot wasn't saved because he aced the obedience test in this moment. His hesitation proves that. He was saved because God remembered Abraham. It's a profound statement about grace, covenant faithfulness, and the power of intercession tied to that covenant.
Okay, that really shifts the focus, doesn't it? Tying Lot's personal escape back to the bigger covenant story. So let's zoom out a bit. Our notes have some fascinating scholarly angles that might, make us see things a bit differently or catch details we missed. Where should we start with those aha moments?
Well, one idea that comes through, maybe from someone like Gordon Wenham, is seeing Lot's whole rescue, especially his reluctance and needing the angel's help, as a kind of contrast to Abraham.
A narrative foil, you mean?
Exactly. Think about Lot hesitating, being dragged out, negotiating his escape. Compare that to Abraham's usual pattern of, well, often quicker faith and obedience elsewhere in Genesis.
Right, like his response to the visitors initially or later with Isaac, much more proactive.
Wenham might suggest Lot's story here. Hesitant, fearful, needing that external push highlights Abraham's faith by contrast. It shows that even someone God considers righteous, like Lot, can really struggle with attachment and fear, and their deliverance might happen despite their flaws.
That contrast is helpful. And didn't Wenham and others also see a kind of typological link? Foreshadowing something?
Yes, the idea that Lot's deliverance from the overthrow, the Hapia of Sodom, foreshadows Israel's exodus from Egypt.
Yeah.
You've got God's people in a wicked land facing judgment.
Sodom, Egypt.
Yeah. And they're rescued, not really by their own merit. Lot's hesitation mirrors Israel's later complaints, right?
Yeah.
But by God's sovereign grace, often mediated through a key figure. For Lot, it's tied to Abraham's intercession and God's memory of him. For Israel, it's Moses.
Seeing Lot's escape as a mini-exodus, that adds a whole other layer. Okay, what about Lot's wife looking back? We know it was disobedience, but the notes suggest maybe deeper layers.
Definitely. Someone like Meredith Kline, who thinks deeply about covenant and spiritual realities, might push us further. That looking back, what about maybe it wasn't just a glance. In that ancient world context, looking back at a cursed place could signify a profound spiritual failure.
Like her heart was still there.
Exactly. A lingering, maybe even defiant attachment to the world God had condemned. An unwillingness to make that clean break. In the face of God's holy judgment, that kind of spiritual attachment is deeply problematic. It challenges God's verdict.
Which makes her becoming a pillar of salt, even more powerful. Not just punishment, but a symbol of what happens when you cling to sin.
A stark, permanent symbol of the danger of that divided heart, that fatal attachment. It really amplifies Jesus' warning later. It's quite sobering.
It really is. The notes also talked about Lot's negotiation for Zoar, that small town. What's the takeaway there?
Well, scholars like Klaus Westermann see that plea for Zoar, the inner town, as really reflecting Lot's fear and, frankly, his compromised faith at that point. He didn't fully trust God's provision or protection in the commanded mountains. He wanted an easier way out, based on his own assessment. And
the name Zoar, small, reinforces that, like a symbol of his scaled-back faith.
Precisely. It represents this smaller, maybe less than ideal escape he bargained for. Now, God grants it, showing incredible patience and mercy, right? But it's presented as an accommodation to Lot's weakness, not necessarily God's best or intended path.
So grace meets him there, but it doesn't necessarily affirm his fearful choice as the ideal one.
That's a good way to put it. It shows God works with us even in our weakness, but maybe suggests that choosing the path of fear, the compromised path, might have consequences or limitations compared to stepping out in full trust, even when it's hard.
A very practical point. Lastly, that word overthrow, HBK, it kept coming up.
Yes. Westermann highlights its repetition, verse 21, 25, 29. He argues it becomes more than just description. It's a defining theological motif for divine judgment, specifically for Sodom and Gomorrah.
It signals something bigger than just the physical destruction.
Right. It signifies utter finality, irreversibility, a complete divine rejection of wickedness that's gone too far. Its repetition makes Sodom's fate the benchmark, the archetype, for God's decisive judgment against extreme sin, setting a precedent we see referenced later by the prophets. It's a powerful term.
Wow. Okay, this isn't just some old story, is it? It's packed with reminders for us right now in our lives, in our ministries. Thinking about all this, what are some of the core messages from our notes that we really need to take to heart today?
Well, one jumps out immediately. The absolute urgency of God's warnings and the serious danger of delaying our response. Remember that angels kept saying, hurry, urging Lot.
Yeah, verses 15, 22, they were really pushing him.
But he hesitated, Wema, in verse 16. And commentators like Kidner stress how that hesitation, that spiritual inertia, nearly cost him everything.
So for us, when we hear God's warnings in Scripture, or maybe feel that nudge from the Spirit,
this story is a huge caution sign against putting it off, against procrastinating, rationalizing delay, letting comfort or fear or attachments keep us from obeying now. whether it's dealing with sin in our own lives or maybe responding to a call God has placed on us in ministry. Delay can be spiritually dangerous. Lot's story screams that urgency.
That's a sharp challenge. Okay, another big one seems to be the influence of our environment. Lot lived in Sodom, a really corrupt place. And even though Peter calls him righteous, look what happened.
Exactly. His sons-in-law mocked the warning. His wife couldn't let go. He himself hesitated. The environment clearly had a profound impact, even on someone distressed by the wickedness around him.
Kidner pointed out that Lot's initial choice to move near Sodom was based on worldly values, right?
Right.
Getting closer and closer to danger.
Right. And the notes remind us that even for a righteous person, close, prolonged association with a sinful culture has this powerful, often subtle, corrupting influence. It affects us, it affects our families.
Which brings up that classic challenge. How do we live in the world but not be of the world today? Especially when our culture often pushes against biblical values.
Lot's story is a cautionary tale about that very thing. It warns against incremental compromise, getting too comfortable to attach to worldly acceptance or security so much that it dulls our spiritual senses or hinders our obedience. It really pushes us to think hard about where we're planting ourselves, what influences we're allowing in, and how we maintain that distinctiveness God calls us to.
That hits close to home. Okay, finally, something that really shines through is God's mercy and the role of prayer. Lot didn't exactly earn his rescue.
Not at all. The text is explicit. The Lord was merciful to him, verse 16. And crucially, God remembered Abraham, verse 29. Scholars like Walt K., Wenham, Sarna all emphasize this. Lot's rescue is fundamentally an act of divine grace.
Tied to God's faithfulness to Abraham and Abraham's prayers back in chapter 18.
Absolutely. Which first reminds us that our own salvation is pure grace through faith, not based on our performance. Lot was flawed, hesitant, yet God saved him. That should make us incredibly humble and grateful, right?
Definitely.
And second, that connection to Abraham, God remembered Abraham, powerfully underscores the impact of intercessory prayer. As Berugman might note, Abraham's pleading had tangible results for Lot. It's a huge encouragement for us, especially pastors, to be persistent in praying for others, particularly those in dangerous situations, trusting that God hears and acts, often because of his covenant faithfulness and the prayers of his people. Prayer matters. Abraham's prayer saved Lot. So just to wrap up our deep dive into Genesis 19.1 down 29, we've really seen the stark reality of God's judgment against persistent, unrepentant sin. That overthrow of Sodom and Gomorrah stands as this powerful, enduring symbol.
Yeah, it's sobering. But running right alongside that judgment is this incredible thread of God's mercy, isn't it? Extended to Lot and his daughters, not because they were perfect, but because of God's own compassion and his faithfulness to Abraham, remembering his covenant and his prayers.
We walk through the escape itself, Lot's hesitation, which is so relatable but also so dangerous, the angels literally pulling him out, his fearful negotiation for Zoar.
And that tragic warning sign in Lot's wife looking back, unable to break free from the world being judged. A permanent reminder.
And from all that, we've pulled out some really crucial reminders for us today, haven't we? The need to respond urgently to God's warnings, the challenge of living faithfully in a compromising culture,
The foundational truth that we're saved by grace, God's mercy, not our own efforts, and the amazing power and importance of praying for others, interceding like Abraham did. As we finish up, here's maybe something to reflect on from this intense passage. Think about Lot's journey here. He hesitates, he negotiates for Zoar, that small, easier option he ultimately needs to be dragged to safety. How does seeing his response challenge you maybe to look at your own life or ministry, especially when you face difficult choices or maybe feel tempted to settle for something less than what God seems to be asking because it feels safer or more comfortable?
Yeah, consider that hesitation, that way mama, and that plea for Zoar. Where in your life do fear, or maybe just comfort or attachment to the familiar, cause you to delay? Or to look for that Zoar, that easier path you can rationalize? Instead of heading towards the mountains, God might be calling you to the path that requires more trust, maybe more effort, more separation. Reflect on how God's mercy met Lot, even in his weakness, absolutely. But also ask yourself, does choosing the compromise path, the Zoar born of fear, lead to the same place of growth or blessing as choosing the path of trusting obedience, even when it looks harder? It's something worth pondering.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into Genesis 19.1:29. We really hope these insights from our notes have sparked some thought and been helpful for your own study and ministry.
Until next time, keep diving deep into the richness of God's Word.